Hey there, this is Danny Echevarria with the ProAudiofiles.com. I'm going to be talking today about mixing drums with EQ, specifically mixing a drum kit with EQ. And recently I did another video about drum bus processing where we looked at ways to deal with the whole kit together on an aux track where you're doing all of your processing to the entire kit at once. Today is going to be more of a granular approach where we look at EQ that I'm using on individual tracks in the drum kit. But before we get into any of the nitty-gritty, let's just take a listen to this example. This is from an upcoming film score by composer Nick Senna. So the basic idea here is that we're going to be dealing with sort of core elements of the drum sound across the frequency spectrum, with the fundamental notes of the shells being the kick, the snare, the toms, living on the lower ends, bass frequencies and low mids. Up above that, you find some mud and boxiness, good stuff to cut. In the upper mids, you start to get into sort of presence and snap, but also harshness and some kind of ugly resonances, especially in the cymbals. So that can be an area to both bring out for some of the parts of the kit and also cut for other parts. And then above that, in the upper frequencies, you get sort of the air and sparkle of the kit. You can get kind of the articulation of the sticks a little bit. So we'll be looking at a few different tracks in this drum kit, but keep that idea in mind that there's sort of these basic frequency areas that we're going to be working with. So a good rule of thumb is to start with a mic that represents the whole kit rather than something like a kick mic or a snare mic when you're building out your drum sound. So I'm going to start with the mono overhead on this one. And I'm going to mute the other tracks in this arrangement, kill the processing, and then I've got these parallel tracks that I'm going to mute. That's sort of a subject for another video. So let's take a listen to this mono drum overhead just soloed. So there's definitely some work we can do with this. I'm going to use one of my favorite EQs all around, but one that's especially good for sort of seeing what's going on, which is this FabFilter Pro Q3. It probably looks a lot like the native EQ and whatever DAW you're using. It's great for that reason also. So the first thing I'm going to do right off the bat is throw in a high-pass filter. And let's get a loop going here. I'm going to start sweeping this filter up. You'll see where the kick fundamental is over here, and I'm going to be eating into some of that, but more so than I would on, say, a kick close mic, but still not so much that I totally decimate the low end of this overhead. Take a listen to the loop. I'm going to sweep it up to about 50 hertz. You can see that's still kind of getting some of this low end, but it's leaving a lot of it intact. The next thing that I'm going to do is sweep another band through the mid-range, and I'm going to boost it and sweep it through and sort of listen for where I like it the least. And then wherever that spot is, that's where I'm going to end up cutting. So listen as I sweep this through. I think I found my culprit here. It's around 500 hertz. So I'm going to do a pretty decent size cut there, maybe just 6 dB. Pretty narrow. The general wisdom is you want to cut narrow, boost wide, though there's exceptions to that. So take a listen to this. I'm going to play back a before and after with and without this EQ. Listen especially to that first cymbal crash that starts this loop off. So here's without. And now I'm going to bring it back in. One more time, without and with. I also notice it cleaning up some sort of boxiness in the snare especially, but there's really sort of a lot you can get away with removing in this mid-range frequency zone. So the next spot I'm going to look at is the upper mids. And this is another spot where, in particular, pay attention to that first cymbal. I'm going to boost between 2 and 3K. There's usually some kind of ugly stuff in here. Check it out. One more time. Let's hear that cymbal. So there's sort of this ring there. I'm going to cut it. Looks like 2.3K. Do a 3 dB cut. Here's a before and after. One more time, before and after. So it's sort of just cleaning up this resonance that I really don't like, which is ultimately going to give us a little more headroom and then also make the drums less harsh, which is cool. So two last moves I'm going to do here are actually boosts. One is going to be a little boost at about 100 hertz, maybe 2 dB. And I'm aiming to bring out some sort of the meat of the kick and also the toms, because this is a pretty tom heavy beat. So I'm going to let those kind of come to life, even though this is an overhead and we're not looking for a ton of low end from the overheads. I don't want to ignore it either. So there's a little low end boost, and then I'm also going to do a high shelving boost, the pretty tight Q. Let's say 6 dB at a cutoff frequency of 15K. And this is just to sort of bring out the brilliance of the kit. So listen to the difference these last couple moves makes. I'll give you a before and after. And without and with. So I hear a little bit more weight in the toms and especially some sort of fluff in the snare from that high shelving boost, which I really like. It gives it just this sort of lightness and sparkle that I think sounds really good. Okay, next I want to look at a different part of the kit using a pretty different type of EQ. This is UAD's API Vision channel strip emulation, which I love for drums in particular, not just because API consoles are kind of known for being very fast and dealing well with transient heavy material, but also because these EQ values I think are especially well chosen for drums. They're just very useful. Not just for drums, but they really do shine there. And you may have another emulation of this 550 EQ, not necessarily the 550L, but it might look familiar to you. There's a lot of emulations out there. So before we get into the nitty gritty, here's a quick before and after this kick mic soloed. Here's without any processing. And with. So let's talk about how I got there with this. The first thing that I did is high pass filtering. You can see down here in the bottom left. Only filtered up to 25 hertz. It's a less intense filter than I used on the overhead because this is the kick mic, and even though I might do some other processing down the line that's going to kind of tame some of those subby low frequencies, I don't want to lose that just yet. I'm really looking to the kick mic to give me the low end sound of the kick. Then I've got some other cuts and boosts across the frequency spectrum here in the EQ section. The biggest one being this deep cut at 300 hertz. That's the bottom band there. So to illustrate what that's doing, I'm going to turn this back up. So there's no cut, and then I'm going to gradually bring it down as the loop plays, and you can kind of hear what it does. So that's all the way in. One more time, I'm going to turn it back up and listen to it come down. So it really clears out this sort of boxy area that is not flattering to the sound of the kick. It's eating up headroom, and it's not just really not adding anything to the whole sound of the kit. So I can scoop that out pretty deep. Then to match that, I'm boosting at 75 hertz. This is the band above. Which is to sort of bring out the weight of the fundamental again. So there's that same concept. We're sort of boosting the fundamental, cutting the mid-range. And then the last thing that I'm doing is this boost at 3K. So remember, with the overhead that we were looking at, 3K is a spot that I actually cut because it's kind of harsh and resonant in the cymbals. But in the kick, that 3K area, sometimes it's a little higher, 4 or 5K, really helps bring out the snap of the batter. So I'm going to do the same thing here where I turn it down and then bring it back up to where I had it. Take a listen. Back down and back up. So it just brings out this sort of presence and attack that I really like. And in the context of the whole kit, it's going to really help it cut. So before we look at the whole kit, I just want to note that in the toms, I'm doing a very sort of similar EQ curve to what you just saw in the kick, where this is the floor tom channel on the left and the rack tom on the right. You can see both of these. I've got the same filter, high pass filter. The floor tom is a little bit more conservative than the rack tom. Floor tom sits lower, so I'm not going to filter as high. Want to maintain the low end a little more. Then I'm doing similar low mid scoops. I've got 300 hertz on the floor tom, 400 hertz on the rack tom. Same principle, where the floor tom sort of sits lower, so its boxiness also sits lower. Boosting the fundamentals, 75 for the floor tom, 150 for the rack. And then boosting some sort of presence and articulation up here as well, where we've got 5K and 8K on these top two channels across the board, just to sort of bring out some snap and attack from the sticks, just like we did with the batter and the kick. So now let's A/B this whole kit. We've got the kit soloed, and I'm going to kill all the channel processing on it. So this is the kit with no EQ. And with. So it really comes to life to my ears. All this mid-range mud and murkiness just gets cleared away, and then this power and oomph comes in to replace it. One more time. Here's a before and after. So with no processing. And with. So big difference. There's a lot that you can do with just EQ on the channels like this. So now let's take a step back and we'll look at the whole mix again. I'm going to bring back in these parallel channels, which is kind of a subject for another video. And if you want to know about the sort of stuff that I'm doing on the bus, you can check out my drum bus processing video. I'm not going to get into that in this one. So here's that whole mix again, everything in now. Now I'm going to A/B again, taking all those drum EQs off. Take a listen to that. And now I'll bring them back. So even hearing this bus processing and parallel processing that I'm doing on the drum kit here, just bringing those channel EQs in and out does a whole lot to help the drums kind of claim their place in this mix. Let's hear that A/B one more time. So here's no processing, or no channel processing anyway. And now with. So I hear the drums just sort of leaping forward, where without that EQ, there's sort of this mid-range stuff that's eating up the headroom. We're clearing that away, bringing out the stuff that really makes it pop, and then when you do that, it just it's right up there with the rest of the mix. So there are lots of ways to use EQ mixing a drum kit, some more sort of surgical and practical, some more weird and creative. These are just a couple of the more useful sort of everyday things that I do almost every time that I pull in a drum kit in a session. Hopefully you found something useful in this, and if you've got any favorite drum EQ tricks that I didn't cover here, please let me know about them in the comments. I'd love to read about the stuff that you guys are doing. One more time, this is Danny Echevarria with the Pro Audiophiles. And if you liked what you saw here today, please be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and I'll be back with more videos real soon. Peace.